Hello everybody, I am Jared Ross, the Genie Vlogger, and welcome back to another Professional Genealogist Reacts. On today's video, I will be reacting to My DNA Test Results by Amazing Phil. Now this is not a channel I really watch much, but this is a channel I'm familiar with, most especially because I did a reaction a while back to Daniel Howell, who is someone who collaborates a lot with Phil, and I think he was mentioned in the video I saw. I can't remember for sure, but I know I saw his face a lot. So I've had him in my watch list and finally decided, let me go ahead and watch him. As far as I can tell, he's probably going to be typical Northwestern European. He looks like a typical Northwestern European, has the accent and everything. So I don't think I'm really going to say anything else. Let's just jump in and see the video.
Hey guys, so my mum's friend June is a doctor. She's not the doctor. I mean, she could be the doctor. That could be a whole different thing. No, she's a doctor, and she gave me a free DNA test. I'm not exactly sure why. I'm thinking because she thought it'd be a cool YouTube video, and not because she's an evil government scientist wanting to steal my DNA and track my every movement. Let's just say she's a nice person. Anyway, I thought it'd be cool to make a video about, because you can find out loads of things about yourself, like who your ancestors were. Well, not who they were. Not Philip Philipson from 1773, but basically what countries they came from.
If you do the work, you can figure out who your actual ancestors are and figure out their name. And especially an ancestor living in the 1770s, that would be someone that you could very possibly figure out using your DNA by using the DNA matches. So that is actually possible. It's just it takes work, whereas what he's going to be looking at is probably going to be the admixture that most people look at, and that doesn't take any work. Just shows you an estimation of the countries that you come from.
What do the results say, Jeremy? Ooh, ancestry compositions. This is going to tell me what countries are running through my...
All right, I'm not sure which site he's testing through. I don't remember if he said it, but this is not a site that I recognize. Granted, this is a 7-year-old video, so it's very possible that this is a test that has since been discontinued or absorbed by another one. Like, I'm wondering if this might be the Nat Geo test. But hopefully he says it if he hasn't said it, because if he said it, I missed it.
My blood, so where my great-great-great-great-great-grandma Shaniqua came from. Loading your results. I called myself Buffy Summers because
that's definitely 23andMe.
Shaniqua came from. Loading your results. Yeah. I called myself Buffy Summers because
is that what the 23andMe website looked like 7 years ago? I tested with 23andMe a bit later because I originally tested with Family Tree DNA, and then I didn't really test anywhere else for a bit because I was getting my parents to test elsewhere. But I don't remember 23andMe ever looking like that. So maybe that was a little bit before I even used it.
Didn't want them to have my real name. Oh, okay. We already knew I was European, but where am I actually from? Okay, I'm 68.6% British/Irish. Also, I might have a bit of Ireland in me. Top of the morning to you. Then 11.5% French and German. So I might have a French ear. Je m'appelle Philip's ear. And I could have a German elbow. Yeah, my Mutter ist ein elbow. I'm part Scandinavian, 1.9%.
We're literally getting all the typical Northwestern European admixtures. And with this being 7 years old, you can even see how less nuanced the readings are, because nowadays they have things much more nuanced, much more granular. So you kind of get a bit more of specific areas in these places. Not quite as much necessarily, but it's definitely much, much more. And I imagine in 7 years, his results have changed a good bit. Granted, with Northwestern European, you just see a general mixture of all of what he's getting. English, Irish, Scottish, Welsh, French, German, Scandinavian. That's kind of the typical Northwestern admixture.
One of my freckles is a Sardinian freckle. And then this is what is exciting me the most. Less than 0.1% sub-Saharan African.
I bet that's not even there anymore. I bet with all of the updates, completely gone. I'd be surprised if it was still there. And if it was still there, it might not necessarily be representative of true sub-Saharan African ancestry, but it certainly gives it a bit more confidence. Granted, less than 0.1% is extremely traced result, meaning we have a very low confidence that it is a true reading. So when it comes to DNA tests, just reading the DNA, it's a 1% margin of error. So reading, whether it's A, C, T, or G, there's a 1% chance that they're going to read it wrong. And when they're doing these tests, they're reading hundreds of thousands of spots, about 700,000 to be exact. So 1% margin of error means that they're going to read about 7,000 different spots in your DNA incorrectly. So where it should have been an A, they accidentally said it was a T, sort of thing. But that's just the first step in doing DNA testing, because then to get to the admixture parts with the percentages, they have to take that DNA and phase it, which basically means they have to figure out what part of the DNA came from mom and what part of the DNA came from dad, because your DNA are base pairs. So when we talk about those A, C, T, and Gs, those are the bases, but they're pairs because one's from mom, one's from dad. And a sequence of specific DNA markers is how we correlate the different population groups to your DNA test. So if you can't phase that correctly, which happens all the time, then you can get misreadings even after the 1% margin of error. But also considering the fact that that 1% error could then cause more issues on that next step, because some of those misreads could end up making it look like a very different type of correlation of a population than what it really is. And so I bring all this up as a point of when you're looking at a less than 0.1% reading of sub-Saharan African, the chances that that's coming from one of these errors, which are just some of the errors that could happen. There's a lot more that can happen in this very complicated sequencing, and it's not as straightforward as a lot of people really like to think it is. So whenever anybody gets one of these 2% or 1% or even less readings today, that's called a trace result. And we call it that because it's to say that while you're getting this result and there is a possibility it's true, that confidence that it's true is much lower than a typical reading, than most above it. Because most things that you get readings above that, you can have a higher confidence that yes, that's probably representative of actual ancestry you have.
Oh, and here's the alien part. Less than 0.1% is unassigned. I feel like I'm on Jeremy Kyle or Oprah or something. Okay, my maternal lines. This is the DNA that I got from my mum and where that generally came from.
So this is the mitochondrial DNA that you're getting, the mitochondria being the powerhouse of the cell. It has its own DNA that you inherit from your mother, and thus, because it's inherited always from the mother, you can trace it up your purely maternal line, your mother's 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 mother, and we can trace it all the way back to one woman who everyone in the living world at this point, as far as we know, their maternal line traces back to this woman, who's colloquially named mitochondrial Eve. Unfortunately, mitochondrial Eve is a concept that a lot of people misunderstand because of that use of Eve, putting that biblical sense in there. And so you have some people that think that it's some sort of like, this is actual Eve. You have others who take it and twist it into this idea that they call the Eve gene. It is really sad how a lot of people will take true scientific stuff and then twist it to fit this weird narrative, and then it gets picked up by all these people. And unfortunately, when it comes to this stuff, which it's mitochondrial Eve, and then on the other side, you have what's known as Y chromosomal Adam. So men inherit their Y chromosome from their fathers, which then is inherited from their fathers, and so on until you reach the man who all Y chromosomes descend from, and he's known as Y chromosomal Adam. But he and mitochondrial Eve did not live at the same time, and they weren't the only humans that were alive when they were living. It's just that they're the only ones who their Y DNA signature, their Y chromosome, and their mitochondrial DNA is what was inherited, and all the others were died out, basically.
Sorry, Australia, I'm not part kangaroo. You're completely left out of this. I share this with Eva Longoria. How do they know Eva Longoria's...
Okay, first off, they're actually not even saying this is who he shares it with. They're saying haplogroups of famous people, Eva Longoria A2. He's K. Look, let's go back just a little bit. He's K2B1, subgroup of K. And you can see where the majority of it is. Haplogroup K is very, very common European reading. It's very commonly found amongst a lot of various groups. As you can see, it's very common mostly in Europe, but then a large amount also kind of in the Mediterranean and in areas of like Turkey and Greece, and kind of getting into the Middle East, Western Asia, and even Saudi Arabia, and even surprisingly, not just North Africa, but the Horn of Africa, Eastern Africa, but then even in areas of Asia. But then he's K2B1, which is going to be a subgroup of K, or a subclade. And so that's going to be even more finite, because this map that they're showing here, I believe that this map is just a K map. So going back to where he is, this is just saying, here's the haplogroups of famous people. And if we go back just a tad bit, not as far as we did before. So then haplogroups of example profiles. And so they kind of give you an example, D4E2, example Japanese person, Chinese person, example Nigerian person. I don't know why they wouldn't give examples of European, but you can see a little bit above that, haplogroups of you and your connections, K2B1, Buffy Summers, which I guess is what he called himself for this test. But all the stuff below, just haplogroups of famous people. So no, you do not share the same mitochondrial haplogroup as Eva Longoria. You share a generally similar haplogroup to Katie Couric, Meryl Streep, and Stephen Colbert, which when you look at your haplogroup, you can see K split off of the more ancient haplogroup you ate about 35,000 years ago. Since then, haplogroup K has been involved in migrations from the Near East into Europe, most notably the founding and expansion of Ashkenazi Jewish populations, which actually my father's mitochondrial line is K9A1, I think it is, if I remember correctly. So this is just basically saying that anybody who has haplogroup K for mitochondria, he's going to know that if you trace up his purely maternal line and you trace up that person's purely maternal line, somewhere in the past about 35,000 years or so, you're going to find a shared ancestor. So it really isn't saying a whole lot necessarily. It's once you start getting into the much more nuanced connections where you do advanced mitochondrial DNA testing, which can be done through family tree DNA, and then you can actually match against people. So with 23andMe, you can't do mitochondrial DNA matching or Y chromosome matching, which I'm guessing he'll get into why after this. So
came from. Sorry, Australia, I'm not part kangaroo. You're completely left out of this. I share this with Eva Longoria. How did they know Eva Longoria's gene type? That's so weird. Prince Philip. Hey, Philip Bros. That's my...
Yeah, so he completely misunderstood that, did not realize it. All those, he's not related to all those people through mitochondrial. It's just examples.
Mums, what about my dad's? Paternal line.
So this is the Y chromosome.
Desmond Tutu and Thomas Jefferson. What?
Yeah, he's going through this terribly. This is why people really should have had genealogists help them out with it, because people really understand this stuff terribly and then put it out and people, hundreds of thousands of people watch it and misunderstand it with them and think that's the way to understand it. His haplogroup here, R1B1, R1B1B2, a subgroup of R1B1, 17,000 years old, very typical in Europe. R1B is a huge haplogroup for all of Europe. A lot of these haplogroups under R1B no longer are called these because some of them get long. R1B1, 2A, B2, it's like crazy long. So you can even see haplogroups of you and your connections. R1B1B2A1. So it's just what they used to do is as soon as they found a new group, they'd be like, okay, so if this is a subgroup of R1B, we'll call it R1B1. And then the next one, R1B2, and the next R1B3. And then when they find a subgroup of that, okay, R1B1A, R1B1B, R1, And so they kept finding all these subgroups, and so you got these long sequences. Now they'll name the groups based off of the DNA marker that's the main marker that they're using to figure out the group. So I think what's usually called what's known as a terminal SNP. So a SNP is the marker of DNA being used, single nucleotide polymorphism. And yeah, so go back here a little bit. I tried to find a good spot to pause it, and here we have one of the best views of the page, honestly. It looks like he is R1B1, B2A1, because what we see over here, it's just another A1 afterwards. So he's R1B1, B2A1, A1. But if we look down here, you can see R1A Anderson Cooper.
Rock, Desmond Tutu.
Oh, and here we go. Okay, so R1A Anderson Cooper, R1B, you can see all these folks. Charlie Rose, Emperor Nicholas II of Russia, John Adams, John Quincy Adams, R1B1, and then R1B1, B2, A1A. And then you can see here Malcolm Gladwell, which is what's selected. So it's saying this is the person where you're the closest connection to him, really. But R1B1, B2, A1A. And so we know for him, for Phil, it's going to continue. And then underneath, you can see Stephen Colbert. He's R1B1B2A1A2F. And then Henry Louis Gates Jr., R1B1B2A2F2. So you can see how that can get really, really annoying and confusing. But yeah, unfortunately here he's doing the same thing, thinking all the people they're listing are relatives.
Okay, so these are some attributes about me that the DNA test has found. Bitter taste perception. There's an 80% chance of me not being able to taste certain bitter flavors. I mean, I'm not sure about that. I licked the Nintendo Switch cartridge and it had a pretty bitter reaction.
Big lick, like a dog. Wait for it.
Oh, it took a while to arrive. Oh, there was a 28% chance of me having blonde hair. Imagine that. Imagine blonde Phil. Apparently I have a typical sensitivity to pain. I thought mine was increased because I swear when I go to the dentist it hurts me more than the average person when I'm having my teeth deep cleaned. I'm literally grabbing onto the dentist chair like, please stop killing me. Maybe it's just because my dentist wants to give me pain. I don't know. I thought I was more sensitive than that. Coriander aversion. See, I don't mind coriander, but some people think it tastes like disgusting soap. I have a typical odds of disliking it. I know some people...
Okay, so I figured this might be a good spot to pause it and just point out a few things. So first off, if you notice down here it says marker RS2741762. So what that's referring to is that's the SNP marker, the single nucleotide polymorphism, or really it's just referring to the spot in your DNA. So it's saying RS2741762, specific spot, and then you can see to the right genotype, AA, AG, or GG. And so this is how it works, is that you either have both of one letter or you have one and the other, because only A can pair with G, only T can pair with C. But here we can see that it's telling you what you need to have to get that. And so when you have both A's, slightly higher odds of disliking the taste of cilantro, A and G, typical odds of disliking the taste of cilantro, and then G and G, slightly lower odds of disliking the taste of cilantro. So at this spot, RS2741762, A is the marker that is correlated to having a higher likelihood of disliking, higher odds of disliking the taste of cilantro. So that's kind of, with a lot of these trait things you see on these sites, that's exactly how they do it. They see, do you have this letter at that spot? But a lot of this is very, very simplified, and when it comes to actually figuring out what genes go into causing certain things, it's a very complicated thing that requires often a lot of different spots of DNA, not just one. But they often will find certain spots that have a very high correlation, and that's what they're basing these off of.
People that if they get it in their mouth, they're like, blah. So if that's you, it's also because of your DNA. What? What is this? Asparagus urine detection. So apparently some people, if they eat asparagus, their pee is going to stink. Thankfully, I'm not in that group. That was really cool to me, especially the Ancestry data, knowing I've got a great cousin out there in Sweden somewhere. Hello, distant relative.
Okay, that was an okay video. Nothing great, nothing terrible. Well, I guess other than the mitochondrial and Y haplogroups where he kind of got some of that wrong. But just kind of typical what we would expect for Northwestern European. We didn't really hear much about his family history, so I think we can just presume English sort of ancestry. Obviously, nothing stood out in his results that would make me think, oh, he might have something going on that he may not have expected. Otherwise, it just seemed very typical Northwestern European. I think the interesting thing to see with such an old video being 7 years old is what are the updated results, if they are, and especially is that African result still there, although at less than 0.1%, super trace result really unreliable. It is a shame that he misunderstood the part with the mitochondrial haplogroups and the Y haplogroups. I think that's something that so many people are into that I wouldn't be surprised if he actually had a lot of comments kind of telling him, you didn't understand that part. Those people aren't related to you. They were just listing all these different people and what their haplogroups were. So, yeah. But otherwise, just a pretty middle-of-the-road DNA video. Now, if you enjoyed the reaction and you'd like to see more just like this, be sure to check out this one right here. Thank you to my Patreon patrons and YouTube members.